The realtor sign went into the lawn of my family's lake house on a Tuesday in October, and my son and his wife didn't find out until the closing papers were already signed. By then, I had taken back every last thing that mattered: my mother's china, my father's tools, the paintings my late wife made of that water, and I was gone. Condo packed, number changed, will rewritten. People keep asking me how a 69-year-old man does something like that quietly. The answer is that I spent 40 years as an accountant. I know how to keep a ledger. And before I tell you the rest of it, do me a small favor and hit that subscribe button and leave a comment telling me what time it is wherever you're listening from. I read every one. Now let me start where it really started, which was the day I drove up to Keuka Lake with a gift in the passenger seat and no idea I was walking into an ambush. The house sits on the west bluff, the part of the lake the old-timers call the Crook because the water bends there like an elbow. My grandfather built the first version of it in 1958. With lumber he hauled up himself, and every generation after added a room or a porch or a dock. I learned to swim off that dock. I asked Helen to marry me on it 43 years ago, with my knees shaking so bad I nearly went in the water. We raised Adam in those summers. Sunburns and snapping turtles in corn from the Mennonite stand down on 54A. When Helen got sick the last time, she asked me to bring her up there one more time, and I did. And she sat on the porch with a blanket over her legs and painted the far shore even though her hands weren't steady anymore. That last canvas was never finished. I kept it. So you understand what the place meant. It was not a piece of real estate to me. It was the only church I ever really believed in. After Helen passed, Adam called me about 2 weeks after the funeral. He was 33 then. He said he and Vanessa had hit a rough patch. A business thing of hers had gone sideways. Money was tight. They were behind on rent in Syracuse. He asked if they could stay at the lake house for a little while just to catch their breath. 6 months, he said. A year on the outside. I didn't even let him finish. Of course, I told him. That's what the place is for. Don't worry about the bills. I've got the taxes and the insurance. You just get yourselves steady. I think part of me was glad. The house had been sitting empty and full of Helen at the same time, and I couldn't stand to go up there alone. Having Adam in it felt like keeping the lights on in a part of my own chest. 6 months turned into a year turned into 3, 3 turned into 5. I never pushed. I'd ask lightly how things were going, and Adam would say, "Good, real good, things are turning around," and I'd let it drop. Around year 2, he called me on a Sunday night, voice tight, and said Vanessa had an opportunity. A boutique she wanted to open in the village, women's clothing, very upscale. She already had the location picked out. She just needed help with the startup. $40,000. I wired it the next morning. I never heard another word about that boutique. There was no boutique. When I drove up that fall, I saw a new Lincoln Navigator in the driveway with dealer plates, and I told myself, well, they must be doing all right. I want to be honest with you because I think the people who watch these stories deserve honesty. I knew, somewhere underneath, that I was being used. A man who built his career reading other people's finances doesn't miss it by accident. He chooses not to see it. I chose. Because the alternative was admitting that my only child looked at me and saw a checkbook with a pulse, and I wasn't ready to know that yet. The week before it all came apart, I decided to make it official. I was going to deed the lake house to Adam. Free and clear, no strings. I had it in my head that this was the right thing, the thing Helen would have wanted, the legacy passing down clean to the next set of hands. I had a woodworker over in Hammondsport build me a small cherry box, and inside it I put the deed and Helen's old wedding ring because I thought one day Adam might want it for his own children. I called and told them I was coming up Friday with something important. Vanessa answered the phone, which she never did, and she sounded almost cheerful. "Bring your appetite, Cal," she said. I'm making dinner. In 5 years, that woman had never once cooked for me. I drove up 5 and 20 and then down the lake road with the box on the seat beside me, and the leaves were turning and I had no idea. I want you to sit in that with me for a second. How good I felt, how stupid and full of hope, checking my hair in the truck window before I walked up the gravel. The first thing I noticed was the porch. Helen's wind chimes were gone. She'd had this set of copper chimes hanging there for 20 years, and they were gone, and in their place was some kind of metal sculpture that looked like a corkscrew having a bad day. Inside was worse. The whole front room had been gutted of everything I knew. My mother's pine sideboard, gone. The braided rug Helen's aunt made, gone. In their place, a low gray sectional the size of a rowboat and a glass coffee table with nothing on it. The walls, and this is the part that made my stomach drop before I even understood why, the walls were bare. Every one of Helen's paintings had been taken down. 40 years of her lake, her dock, her crooked old apple tree, all of it gone from the walls and replaced with framed prints of nothing. Beige squares, hotel art. Adam came out of the kitchen drying his hands. He looked terrible, honestly. Thinner than I'd seen him, shoulders rounded forward like a man expecting to be hit. "Hey, Dad," he said, "thanks for coming up. There was something in how he said it that I should have read." We sat down to dinner at a table I didn't recognize. They'd thrown out my father's table, too, the one with my initials carved underneath from when I was 9 and got the belt for it. The food was clearly catered, plated like a magazine, on dishes that weren't ours. Vanessa poured herself a glass of wine nearly to the rim, and I, fool that I was, thought, all right, let's make this special. I set the cherry box on the table between the candles. I gave a little speech. I'm not a speech man, but I'd practiced this one. I said the house had been in our family since 1958, that my grandfather built it, that it had passed down hand to hand, and that I wanted it to pass to Adam now while I was still here to see it. I opened the box and showed them the deed. I said I'd already talked to a lawyer in Penn Yan about doing the transfer, that it could be done within the month, and that the house would be his to keep to fill with his own kids someday. There was a silence, and then Vanessa laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the laugh you give when somebody finally hands you the thing you've been waiting on and they've wrapped it wrong. "Finally," she said. "Do you have any idea how long we've been sitting up here in this drafty antique waiting for you to let go of it?" I didn't understand. I said something like, "Let go, Vanessa. I'm giving it to you. I'm giving you the house." She put down her glass. "We don't want the house, Cal. We want what it's worth." I had a man come out and look at it. Lakefront on Keuka, West Bluff, this acreage. We're looking at 1.9, maybe 2.1 if we find the right downstate buyer who wants a vineyard view. That's our future. Not playing groundskeeper to your dead wife's hobbies for the rest of our lives. The room sort of tilted. I looked at my son. Adam was staring at his plate. He had his napkin twisted in both fists, knuckles white, and he would not lift his eyes. "You want to sell it," I said. I heard my own voice come out flat. "Of course we want to sell it," she said, and she stood up so fast her chair scraped. "That's the entire point. What did you think, Cal, that we grow old up here listening to you tell the same 3 stories about your grandfather and the lumber? We've given 5 years to this place. We've earned it." And then she did the thing. There was one painting still up, the only one she hadn't taken down. Helen's last one, the unfinished one. The far shore in October, half filled in, propped on the mantel where I'd put it years ago because I couldn't bear to hang it or to hide it. Vanessa walked over and took it off the mantel. I thought for one idiot second that she was going to hand it to me. Instead, she looked at me, and there was something in her face I'd never seen pointed at me before, pure contempt, and she put her knee up and drove the canvas down against it. The frame cracked. The canvas tore. That particular sound, a wet ripping, the lake Helen never finished splitting right down the middle. Then she did it again, smaller, and dropped the pieces on the floor. "This whole house is a shrine to a woman who's been dead 5 years," she said, and her voice climbed into a shriek. "Her dishes, her paintings, her junk in every closet. We've lived inside a tomb. Well, we're done. This is our house now, and you can keep your little box." Adam never moved, never said a word, never lifted his head while his wife put her knee through the last thing his mother ever made. I got up. My hands were shaking, but I made them work. I crouched down and I gathered the pieces of that canvas off the floor, the torn shore, Helen's brushstrokes in my fingers, and I put them inside my coat, slow, one piece at a time. I picked up the cherry box with the deed still in it, untransferred, and Helen's ring still inside. Vanessa was saying something behind me. I could hear the tone of it. "See, this is exactly what I told you. He cares more about her than about us," but the words didn't reach me. The screen door clapped shut, and I was on the gravel, and then I was in the truck. I sat in that driveway a long time. 10, 15 minutes, engine off. I took the pieces out of my coat and laid them on the passenger seat where the box had ridden up, and I looked at Helen's October by the dome light. Then I started the truck and drove home. The drive back to my condo outside Rochester is normally about an hour and a half. That night it took me close to 3. I missed my exit twice. I sat at a green light on routes 5 and 20 until somebody behind me leaned on their horn, and I realized I'd been just staring at the torn canvas on the seat. I got home a little before midnight, and I didn't turn on a single light. I stood in the dark of my own front hall holding a coat full of my dead wife. I didn't sleep. I sat out on the little balcony in a plastic chair I'd bought at the Walmart on Jefferson Road and never replaced, and I watched the parking lot lights, and I let myself feel it. The tearing sound, Adam's silence. That was the loud part. Not Vanessa. Vanessa was a stranger who'd married into us and showed her true face, and you can survive a stranger. What I couldn't get around was my son sitting there with his eyes on his plate, choosing her, choosing the money, choosing not to be a man in his own mother's house. Somewhere around 4 in the morning, the grief did something I didn't expect. It cooled. It set up hard, like concrete, and underneath it, I found a different thing. A thing I used in my working life every day for 40 years and had let go soft in retirement. Clarity. I went inside as the sky was going gray, and I got out the box of house records I keep, the way old accountants do, everything filed, and I started to add it up. I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad and I wrote it all down because numbers don't lie and they don't get embarrassed and they don't sit there staring at their plate. Property taxes on the lake house, a little over $19,000 a year, 5 years, $96,000 and change. Homeowners insurance, all 5 years. My name, my checking account. Utilities, every winter I kept the heat on so the pipes wouldn't burst, all me. Repairs. The new roof in year 3, $11,000, me. The dock rebuild after the ice took it, me. And then the $40,000 for a boutique that never opened its doors. When I finished the column and drew the line and added it up, I sat and looked at the figure for a long while. $171,000, plus a navigator in the driveway I'd never asked about, plus catered dinner on china that wasn't ours, plus a woman who'd already had my grandfather's house appraised for sale while she lived in it for free. I'd been telling myself a story for 5 years about family and legacy and keeping the lights on. The legal pad told the real story. I wasn't a father to them. I was a line item, a delay. The only thing standing between Vanessa and $1.9 million was an old man who hadn't signed the deed yet. So I decided to make sure he never did. I want to be clear about something because people watch these and they think it's about rage. It wasn't rage. Rage burns out by lunchtime. This was correction. I had made an error 5 years ago, a generous, foolish, fatherly error, and I was going to correct it with the same cold care I'd have given any client's books. I opened my laptop and I started a spreadsheet. I won't tell you what I named the file, but it made me feel like myself for the first time in days. The law turned out to be simple, and it was on my side. I spent 2 days reading New York property statutes, and then I called the only lawyer up there I trusted, Lydia Marsh in Penn Yan. She'd settled my parents' estate years back, and I remembered her as the kind of person who read every page and didn't waste a word. Her office is in an old brick building on Main Street, with surveyor's maps on the walls. I put on a pressed shirt and a tie for the first time since the funeral, because some appointments you dress for, and I drove up. I laid it all out on her desk, the deed, sole name, mine, no co-owner, no lien, the tax receipts, the insurance, the wire transfer memo that said boutique startup. I told her my son and his wife had lived in the house 5 years rent-free, no lease, nothing signed, and that they'd made it plain they intended to sell it out from under the family the second it was in their name. I told her I wanted it done quietly. Find a buyer, close it, and they find out when they find out. Lydia listened without interrupting, which I've come to learn is a rare and beautiful thing in a person. When I finished, she tapped her pen on the deed and said, "Cal, legally, you're standing on solid ground. This property is yours. There's no lease, no tenancy. They can point to." Under New York law, they're house guests who overstayed by about 4.5 years. You can sell it whenever you'd like. I asked her how long a sale would take. 60 days, give or take, she said. We can serve them legal notice, 30 days out, which satisfies the statute, and we can have a cash buyer if we price it to move. She paused and looked at me, and her face softened a notch. Are you sure about doing it this quiet? Once it's done, it's done. I'm sure, I said. I made the loud mistake 5 years ago. I'd like to make the quiet correction now. She nodded, and we shook on it, and I left her office with a representation agreement and a timeline and, for the first time in days, the feeling of a man who has a plan. Before any sale, though, I had to get our things out. There was a back storage room at the lake house and a part of the attic where all of Helen's life and my parents' lives had been quietly sitting while Vanessa redecorated around them. My mother's pine furniture, my father's tools, photo albums going back to the 40s. Helen's other paintings that hadn't made it to the walls, her good quilts, the box of letters we wrote each other the year I was in the service, $50,000 of family that those two had stepped past for 5 years without ever once looking at it. Adam, as it happened, gave me my opening. He called. It took 5 tries before he picked up. Each rejected call I marked down like a man taking inventory, and he said, oddly, that he needed to come get some paperwork from the house. His and Vanessa's, he said, tax documents, the lease on the Navigator, that kind of thing, they'd left it all in the study. Can you be there Saturday, Dad? 10 o'clock. That told me 2 things. 1, they didn't yet know what was coming. And 2, I had a reason to be at the house with a truck without raising an alarm. So I said, fine, Saturday at 10. I rented a box truck and I hired 2 college boys from Geneva to help me load. I got there at 8, 2 hours early, and Vanessa's car was gone, but Adam's wasn't. He met me at the door looking like he hadn't slept either. Dad, he started, listen, about the other night. Vanessa was upset. She didn't... Not now, I said. I'm here on business. Where's the key to the storage room? He blinked. It's not locked. Why? I walked past him. The storage room was just as I'd left it, untouched, a museum of everything they didn't value. I had the boy start loading my mother's furniture while I went through the study and pulled the family papers, the original deed from '58, in my grandfather's fountain pen hand, the chain of title, the old surveys. The paperwork Adam wanted, his lease and his tax stuff, I found in a drawer and I set it in a banker's box and put it on the porch for him because I wasn't going to be accused later of stealing his documents. That detail mattered to me. I take back what's mine. I don't touch what's theirs. "Dad, what is all this?" Adam kept saying, following me from room to room. "Why are you taking the furniture? What's going on?" And I just kept working. At one point, he stood in the study doorway and said in a small voice, "Are you angry about the painting?" And I stopped, and I looked at my son, and I said, "Adam, I'm not angry. I'm done. There's a difference, and you'll understand it someday." Then I went back to wrapping Helen's albums in moving blankets. We were loaded by 2. I drove the truck off that bluff with everything that mattered to me strapped down in the back, and I did not look at the lake in the mirror. There are some goodbyes you can only do facing forward. I'll tell you what the next 6 weeks were, briefly, because the law is slow and dull, and this isn't a documentary about closings. Lydia found a buyer fast, a couple from Buffalo, Mark and Susan Caldwell, retiring, looking for exactly that kind of lakefront, no kids, all cash, no contingencies. They walked the property on a gray morning, and Susan Caldwell stood on the dock my grandfather rebuilt and started to cry, the good kind, and said, "This is the place, Mark. This is it." I'll be honest, that almost broke me, because it was the right kind of people getting it, people who'd love it, and that was its own small grief and its own small grace. We agreed on $1.85, cash, 30-day close. Lydia served the legal notice to vacate the same week the contract was signed. That's when Vanessa came apart. She found out from the notice on the door, hand-delivered. The phone call started. Adam first, frantic, then her, screaming. And I let them all go to voicemail, and I saved each one because Lydia told me to. Then they did exactly what Lydia predicted. They lawyered up. They found a man in Syracuse, fellow named Dalton, whose website promised aggressive representation, and they paid him $8,000. They didn't have to file an emergency motion claiming I'd made an oral promise to give them the house, and they'd relied on it to their detriment. Promissory estoppel, it's called. Dalton scheduled a hearing. Now, somewhere in those 6 weeks, something else happened that I didn't plan for and didn't expect, and it's the only part of this whole story I'd call a gift. Lydia and I started spending time together that wasn't strictly business. It started with coffee to go over documents, and then it was dinner at a place in Hammondsport that wasn't about documents at all, and then it was a long walk through the vineyards on a Sunday where we talked about everything except the house. She'd been divorced a long time, raised a daughter on her own, built her practice out of nothing in a small town that didn't always make room for a woman who read every page. One evening, on the terrace of a restaurant over the water, she reached across the table and put her hand over mine. And she said, "Cal, I don't know what's coming for you with all this, but I want you to know you're not doing it alone." And I couldn't say anything back for a minute. When I found my voice, it came out rough. I told her that meant more than I could say. It did. The hearing was on a cold morning in December in the county courthouse, the kind of small courtroom built for quick motions. Adam and Vanessa sat at the plaintiff's table with Dalton. Vanessa wore black, severe, the costume of the wronged. Adam looked like a man waiting for a diagnosis. The judge was a no-nonsense woman named Whitfield, who'd clearly seen 1,000 of these. Dalton stood and made his speech. His clients had lived in the property 5 years, he said, on the explicit verbal promise from me that it would one day be theirs, and they'd invested their time and their hopes and their hearts in reliance on that promise. Lydia didn't even raise her voice. She stood and said, "Your Honor, there is no documentation of any such promise because no such promise was ever made. Mr. Reese intended to gift the property as recently as October. He changed his mind, as is his absolute right as the sole owner, when his daughter-in-law informed him she planned to sell it and then destroyed his late wife's artwork in his presence. Judge Whitfield looked at Dalton over her glasses. "Counsel, do you have anything in writing? A note, an email, a text, anything?" "Your Honor, family promises are often verbal." "That's not what I asked," she said, "in writing. Yes or no?" "No, Your Honor, but—" Then Lydia laid a thick folder on the bench. "The plaintiffs can't produce a written promise because none exists," she said. "What Mr. Reese can produce is 5 years of records, every property tax payment, every insurance premium, the new roof, the dock, the utilities, a $40,000 loan that was never repaid. $171,000, Your Honor, every dollar of it from Mr. Reese. The plaintiffs contributed nothing. No rent, no taxes, nothing but a signature on a lease for a luxury SUV. This is not detrimental reliance. This is 5 years of a man supporting 2 adults who repaid him by listing his family home for sale while they lived in it for free." Whitfield turned to Adam. "Sir, did you pay rent to live in this house?" "No, Your Honor, but it's family." "Property taxes?" "No." "Insurance, repairs, anything?" "No." "So you lived," the judge said, "with no expenses for 5 years." Adam said yes. She took off her glasses. "This is not a complicated matter. In New York, an oral promise to convey real property is unenforceable absent a written agreement. Mr. Reese owns this property outright, has paid every expense, and has provided proper legal notice. He has the unqualified right to sell it. The motion is denied. Occupants are to vacate by December the 20th. The gavel came down, and it was over in under 20 minutes. Outside on the courthouse steps, Vanessa lost it completely. She came at me with her whole body. "You destroyed this family, you sick old man. What kind of father does this?" I stood still and let her finish. When she ran out of breath, I said quietly, "No, Vanessa. You destroyed what was left of this family the night you put your knee through Helen's last painting in her own house. I just stopped paying for the privilege." And then Adam came up behind her, and his voice cracked, and he said, "Dad, please. We've got nowhere to go." I looked at my son for a long moment. He was 38 years old. "Adam," I said, "you had a good income for 5 years and no expenses. If you'd saved even a little instead of leasing navigators and funding boutiques that don't exist, you'd have a down payment on a place of your own right now. You made choices. I'm done paying for them." And I turned and walked to my truck and left him standing there, just his name the last thing I said to him. The rest was already gone. The closing was the 20th, the same day they had to be out. The Caldwell signed. The wire hit $1.85 million, real and final, and I shook Mark Caldwell's hand and told him to take good care of the dock. My grandfather built it twice. "We will," he said. "It's the most beautiful place we've ever seen." A sheriff's deputy delivered the vacate notice that afternoon, and Adam and Vanessa moved into a rental apartment over in Geneva, $1,400 a month, which I'm told was a difficult adjustment from free. Their credit was wrecked from the legal fees. The boutique money was long gone. Vanessa filed for divorce in the spring, I heard later, and took what little there was with her, which is exactly what you'd expect from a woman who saw a man as an obstacle to a real estate transaction. A week after the closing, I sat in Gloria Bennett's office in Rochester, my estate attorney, and I rewrote my will. My old one named Adam as sole beneficiary, my IRA, my investments, the proceeds now from the house, the better part of $2.5 million all told. Gloria looked at me over her reading glasses and said, "Cal, he's your only child. Are you certain?" "My only child," I said, sat at a table and watched his wife destroy his mother's last painting and didn't lift his head. He borrowed $40,000 on a lie. He lived in my house 5 years and gave back nothing but a lawsuit. Why would I reward that? She nodded slowly and asked who I wanted instead. I named two, half to a Veterans Relief Fund I'd served, and I'd watched too many men come home to nobody, and the other half to Lydia Marsh. Gloria's eyebrows went up. The lawyer from Penn Yan, she said. Yes, I said, because when everyone else in my life was looking at me and seeing money, she looked at me and saw a person. I'd like the record to reflect that. Lydia tried to refuse it when I told her, of course she did. She got upset, said she couldn't accept it, that it wasn't why she'd helped me. I put my finger gently to her lips and told her to stop, that it wasn't really about the money, it was about what she represented, that she was the only one who treated me like a human being in 5 years, and I needed her to know she mattered. Her eyes filled. You matter to me too, you stubborn old fool, she said, and we left it there. Late in December, her daughter Emily, a physician down in Ithaca, drove up to meet me over lunch. She was protective, which I respected. When Lydia stepped away from the table, Emily looked at me square and said, I'll be direct. My mother has been alone a long time because she's careful with herself, and she's earned that care. If you're going to be in her life, you be good to her. I told her I intended to be. She studied my face a moment, then nodded. Good, she said. She talks about you all the time. There was an evening in January. I'll keep for myself mostly, but I'll tell you this much. Lydia and I sat in my condo, watching snow come down over the city, and I said out loud the thing I'd believed since the funeral, that I'd figured my life was basically over at 69, that after Helen and after Adam there wasn't much left but waiting. And Lydia turned to me and said, No, you proved to yourself you could survive. You stood up for your own dignity. And I took her hand, and we stood there with the snow falling, and the future was uncertain, and somehow that didn't frighten me anymore. In February, an email came from Adam. Subject line, please read. I stared at it a while, and then I opened it. He wrote that the last few months had been the hardest of his life, that he and Vanessa were finished, that he'd started seeing a counselor. The counselor had asked him when he'd stopped standing up for himself, and he couldn't remember. He wrote that he'd been a coward, that he'd sat there while his mother's painting was destroyed, that he wasn't asking to be forgiven because he didn't deserve it, but that maybe one day we could talk. I miss my father, he wrote. I sat with it for a long time. Then I wrote back. Slow, deleting and starting over more than once, I told him I'd read his letter and that I could see he was beginning to understand something, and that understanding was real progress. But I told him I needed time, maybe a great deal of it, that what happened had changed me, that I was no longer the man who let himself be used. If you're truly changing, I wrote, do it for yourself and not to win back my approval. Be well. And I signed it, your father, and I sent it, and Lydia put her arms around me, and I let myself grieve the boy who used to take his first running jumps off that dock, the one who somewhere along the way I lost. In the spring, she and I drove out to the coast and stayed a week in a little inn, and I started volunteering one afternoon a week with a legal aid clinic that helps older folks. An elderly woman came in not long ago, wringing her hands, and told me her grandson kept pressuring her to put her house in his name. For tax reasons, he said. I told her to trust the cold feeling in her stomach, that her house was her security, and nobody who loved her would ask her to give it up. But he's family, she said. Real family, I told her, earns your trust by respecting you. It doesn't demand the deed. She left a little straighter than she came in, and I sat there afterward and felt something I hadn't felt in years, something I can only call purpose. The thing that broke me turned into the thing I used to keep other people from being broken the same way. I keep Helen's torn painting in my study now. I never had it repaired. The tear runs right down the middle of the lake she didn't get to finish, and I've made my peace with that, because some things stay broken and you carry them anyway. But I framed it. I gave it a place on the wall, the place of honor, the October she was working, on the day she set the brush down for the last time. Lydia asked me once if I ever regretted any of it with Adam. I was quiet a long while. I regret that the boy I raised disappeared somewhere I couldn't follow, I told her. I regret that I didn't see it sooner, but I don't regret the day I stopped paying to be treated like a stranger in my own family's house. That wasn't cruelty. That was the first honest thing I'd done in 5 years. And Helen, I think, would have driven the truck herself. The torn painting still hangs in my study, right at eye level where I can't avoid it, and I put it there on purpose. For 5 years, I let myself believe that loving my son meant never asking him for anything back. I paid the taxes, I covered the loan that built no boutique, I kept the heat on through the winters, and I called it generosity. It wasn't. It was fear wearing generosity's coat. I was afraid that if I ever drew a line, Adam would walk away, so I let Vanessa step over me again and again, until the night she put her knee through the last thing Helen ever made. Cause and effect is a patient teacher. You teach people how to treat you by what you tolerate, and for 5 years I taught 2 adults that there was no bottom to what I'd absorb. What turned it around wasn't anger. I want to be careful saying that, because the world tells you to get mad, get even, blow it all up. I didn't blow anything up. The thing that saved me was the part of myself I'd let go soft in retirement, the clear-eyed habit of looking at what's actually in front of me instead of the story I wished were true. The night I sat down with that legal pad and added up the real numbers, I stopped lying to myself. $171,000 doesn't have feelings. It just tells you where someone's loyalty really sat. Seeing clearly is its own kind of courage, because once you see, you can't go back to pretending, and pretending is so much more comfortable. But seeing isn't enough on its own. Plenty of people know exactly how they're being used and stay anyway, because doing something about it is hard and lonely and slow. 60 days of closings, a courtroom in December, a son crying on the steps asking where he's supposed to go. It would have been easier to fold, to sign the deed, to buy 1 more year of being called a good father. The hard road and the right road were the same road, and walking it took everything I had. I'm not telling you it felt good. Winning a case against your own child feels like swallowing glass, but I'd rather carry an honest grief than a comfortable lie. If you take one thing from an old man, take this. Be decent, but don't confuse decency with letting yourself be robbed, because real respect is something earned, not extracted. Keep your eyes open, even when the truth costs you, especially then. And when you finally see what you have to do, find the spine to do it, even if your hands shake the whole way. Helen used to say I was the gentlest, stubborn man she ever met. I think she'd be glad I finally remembered the stubborn part. Some things stay broken, like that painting, and you carry them anyway, but you carry them standing up.